so far. So the earth was being overburdened by armies and very military forces, kshatriyas, right? So the Mother Earth who came in the shape of a cow went with Lord Brahma to Lord Vishnu and said, please help me. The earth is just there's just too many military forces and I just cannot bear this. And so Lord Krishna agreed to advent himself down on the earth. And this was about 5,000 years ago. So then there was all this stuff that happened before Lord Krishna was quote unquote born or appeared to take birth, right? And one of the most notable things was that so Vasudeva and Devaki, they had just gotten married, and Kamsa, who was Devaki's brother, was doing his ceremonial thing of taking the newlyweds to their new home. And then a voice came from the sky and said, Kamsa, you fool, you are so calm and happy right now, but you do not know that the 8th son of your sister will kill you. And so then Kamsa freaks out, and he's about to kill Devaki on her wedding day and in broad daylight, and she's his sister, like all these crazy things. And Vasudeva kind of talks him down, right? So Kamsa, who's this big king, he kind of can do whatever he wants. So Vasudeva is also a king, but he knows he can't really, like go toe to toe with this guy exactly. That's also not really Vasudeva's style. So Kamsa takes them into and makes them his prisoners, and Vasudeva is like, okay, we will present our children to you one after another when they're born as a gesture of goodwill, and you can kind of do whatever you want with them. And Kamsa is like, he's like pacified by that at first, but then after Narada Muni comes and says like, and kind of like pokes him a little bit like, hey, so the demigods are being born as the Yadus, so they're going to be coming after you, you got to watch out. Kamsa freaks out again, and he basically, as Vasudeva and Devaki, who are prisoners in his castle, in his palace, bring their babies to him one after another, he just kills them. And this keeps going until the 8th child, right, which is Lord Krishna, which we heard about yesterday. And there was this tricky switcheroo where Vasudeva was able to take Lord Krishna right after he was born across town, across the river to where Nanda Maharaj was in Nandagram in Vrindavan, and switch out the babies because Nanda's wife Yashoda had just given birth to a baby girl. So he switched them, put Krishna in the place of the baby girl, and brought the baby girl back to the palace. And all this was happening under cover of night, while all the palace guards were magically sleeping, and so nobody knew that that Vasudeva had gotten out, and the switcheroo had taken place. And this is where we are going to start the next part of this adventure. So, readers, do you all have your microphones? All right. By Yogamaya's influence, the prison doors shut tight. The guards awoke and heard a newborn crying in the night. They ran to Kamsa shouting, Devaki has had her child. As Kamsa bolted out of bed, his scattered hair hung wild. While rushing to the cell of Vasudeva and his poor wife, King Kamsa thought, now cruel time has come to take my life. He burst into the prison cell, eyes wide in great alarm, and saw his helpless sister, baby due to force of destiny, but kindly spare this harmless girl. She'll be your gift to me. She clutched Yashoda's child and wept, but even as she begged, King Kamsa snatched the baby girl and gripped her tiny legs. Collapsing to his knees, he raised the girl above his head and braced himself to smash her on the floor till she was dead. The child, however, slipped away and rose up in the air, transforming to an 8-armed goddess. Kamsa gasped and stared. Bedecked in jewels, silks, and blooms, as angels sang her praise, she held 8 deadly weapons, such as trident, sword, and mace. The goddess Yogamaya, who was soon to gather fame as Durga, Devi, Kali, and a host of other names from avaricious people asking blessings of their choice, addressed the frightened Kamsa in a firm, impassioned voice. You foolish Kamsa, what will be the use of killing me when God himself, Lord Krishna, is in fact your enemy? He's taken birth already in a secret, distant place. Do not kill babies needlessly and add to your disgrace. To see this fearsome goddess and to hear her reprimand left Kamsa very humble, and he issued a command to free the blameless couple. Then he turned to them and said, because of my most wicked sins, your 7 sons are dead. Because of me, dear relatives, your pain has been immense. Now what will be my destiny for such a great offense? The unembodied voice we heard misled us all and lied, but I believed it anyway, and all your children died. Okay, Nick.
When Kamsa blamed himself, poor Devaki felt no relief, so he spoke some philosophy to try to ease her grief. Your sons had their own karma, which they finished in this birth. The body's just an ethern doll that soon returns to earth. The soul, however, never dies, and those who know this truth stay unattached to worldly things and seek the absolute. Our family and social situations never last. I now see this quite clearly, even though I haven't in the past. Dear brother and dear sister, you are both so as good as saints. I treated you so terribly, yet you've shown such restraint. Can you forgive a heartless wretch so foolish and inept? With this King Kamsa fell before his prisoners and wept. When Devaki saw Kamsa so repentant and sincere, her anger at his sinful deeds completely disappeared. Then Vasudev, who saw that Krishna's plan was taking place, was also freed from anger and affirmed with poise and grace. O noble king, what have you said is perfectly correct. Due only to their ignorance do foolish men accept. Their bodies are as themselves, accept their bodies as themselves. As such, they simply think in terms of all that they possess today and all they long to earn. The soul immersed in ignorance cannot be satisfied. When things go well, he dances, and when things go wrong, he cries. He always sees some problem or immediate reward, and never sees the all-controlling presence of the Lord. As all agreed upon these points of shared philosophy, King Kamsa took the chains off Vasudeva and Devaki. Much pleased by this conclusion, Kamsa took his sister's leave and entered his own place, his anxiety relieved. The next day, though, King Kamsa called his ministers to see what they would think of goddess Yogamaya's prophecy, that he would kill Kamsa had that he who would kill Kamsa had been born, but somewhere else. The ministers, great demons, all discuss among themselves. Emerging from their conference, their spokesman said with pride, if this is true, King Kamsa, we must use infanticide. So let us kill each child who has been born 10 days before and save your precious life, O king. Oh yes, and what is more?
I'll continue. The gods run in fear at the sound of your bow. Your arrows harass them wherever they go. Their weapons abandoned, they're fighting all through. They either escape or surrender to you. Lord Vishnu finds yogis and hides in their hearts. Lord Shiva takes off for some forested parts. Brahma's meditating and Indra's withdrawn. The danger to you from the gods is all gone. And yet, like the smoldering ashes of fire, the gods may return to obstruct your desire. Destroy them this time, and your worries are through, and we shall suggest what your highness should do. The powerful Vishnu must first be controlled. He only survives where Brahminical souls perform sacrifices and care for the cows. Great king, you must start persecuting them now. King Kamsa listened carefully to what the demon said and felt his pride returning as their statements filled his head. His humbleness and sorrow for his errors slipped away. He shouted, let the persecution start this very day. The mystic demons cheered the chance to plunder, kill, and rape. They started to transform themselves to vicious, fearful shapes. They thought that killing Vaishnavas would save King Kamsa's head, not knowing that their own destruction waited just ahead.
Nearby in Shri Gokula, where the cows and cowherds lived, the gentle Nanda Maharaj was chief executive. Upon receiving word about his newborn baby boy, he bathed and dressed and gave out precious gifts in utter joy. He gave 2 million cows adorned with gems to Brahmin priest, along with hills of produce, golden cloth, and lovely feast. Such charity to Brahmanas made the kingdom purified. The Brahmanas chanted Vedic hymns and all were satisfied. Gokula's happy residents cleaned every nook and cranny and decked the streets with mango leaves, perfumes, festoons, and flags. They mixed up oil and turmeric to make a golden salve and used it with some peacock plumes to dress the cows and calves. The cowherd men put on their jeweled turbans, coats, and silks that proved enormous opulence exists in cows and milk. Their wives, the gopis, all endowed with lovely hips and breast, wore kumkum and vermilion and were also nicely dressed. The citizens, ecstatic at the news of Krishna's birth, bought gifts of gems and gold and other products of the earth. They blessed the heir apparent with fine oils and shouted out, "This child will rule our kingdom long and well without a doubt." As drums and trumpets filled the air and festive spirits rose, the guests splashed milk and liquid ghee on another's clothes. To satisfy Lord Vishnu through his servants as required, King Nanda gave to all the guests the gifts they most desired. Another wife of Vasudeva, Rohini, had remained within the care of Nanda while her husband was detained. She felt so pleased for Yasoda, she donned her finest dress and wandered through the gathering to welcome every guest. The atmosphere in Nanda's home was naturally endowed with happiness and opulence derived from tending cows. But when Lord Krishna came within King Nanda's loving care, good fortune's goddess, Lakshmi, also made her dwelling there.
Soon Nanda closed the festival, but he could not relax, for he was due in Mathura to pay his yearly tax. When Vasudeva, his stepbrother, learned Nanda had arrived, he went at once to tell him how his wife and he survived. As Nanda greeted Vasudeva, embracing him with love, he felt he had regained his life and thanked the stars above. The younger Vasudeva showed his respects and then began discreetly asking questions on the state of Krishna's plan. Dear Nanda, at your age, you'd lost all hope of having sons. It surely is good fortune that your heir has finally come. Good fortune also granted me the chance to see you here, for in this world it's often hard to see those you hold dear. The river's current brings together flowing sticks and leaves, then spreads them quite indifferently by whirlpools, thrusts, and heaves. So too we come together due to bodily relation, then lose each other's company through time and complication. How are Gokula's fertile lands so blessed with grass and trees? How are the cows you raise so well? I hope there's no disease. How is my wife Rohini, whom you kindly shelter there? Is Balaram, our son, still doing well within your care? They're fine, said Nanda, but that wicked Kamsa killed your boys. At least your daughter reached the gods and could not be destroyed. By destiny, your children came and then were taken back. Dear friend, our fate rules everything. Take comfort in this fact. On hearing this, wise Vasudeva could clearly understand that Nanda had no inkling of Lord Krishna's clever plan. He said, "You are so wise and kind. Now, since you've paid your tax, before some danger hits Gokul, please, my friend, go back." So Nanda hugged his stepbrother and, thanking him again, prepared to go to Gokula with all the cowherd men. They yoked their bulls to bullock carts, as was their simple way, and drove from Mathura back to the country right away. While contemplating Vasudeva and all that he had said, King Nanda journeyed home with an increasing sense of dread. Within his heart, he offered God sincere and fervent prayers to save his son and everyone from danger and despair.
Thank you, readers. Okay, so this is an action-packed section. So first we have the baby girl, right, Yogamaya. She's there in the prison cell with Devaki and Vasudeva, and then King Kamsa comes. He's literally about to kill this baby girl with his bare hands. She reveals her form as this 8-armed goddess, and Kamsa is very apologetic, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," and he says, "Oh, okay, Devaki and Vasudeva, you can go," because Yogamaya tells him, like, actually, Krishna is in another place like that. This is not what you're looking for, right? So then Kamsa is super apologetic, but then the next day he talks to his ministers about what the goddess Yogamaya said, and they said, okay, well, if the baby's still out there, we just got to go and kill all the babies. Kamsa's like, okay, and then the ministers are like, well, and we also gotta start persecuting all the brahmanas because that'll get at Lord Vishnu because we don't want him to come back and to threaten you. Kamsa says, okay, and then it switches over to Gokula where. But by contrast, Nanda Maharaj is very, very happy. He's just had this son. He gives out all of these. He has this big party, gives out all of these gifts to everybody. Basically, turns into Oprah, like you have a cow, you get a cow, you get a cow. It's really amazing. And then Nanda goes to Mathura, where Kamsa and where also Vasudev are, and pays his tax to Kamsa as the things that he has to do every year. We get to do it, online and through the mail, which is kind of nice, but they had to go in person. And then Nanda and Vasudev get to meet each other, and Vasudev gets to like suss out the situation, realizes, okay, everything's going according to plan. Nanda doesn't know there was a baby switch, and everything, the wheels are in motion. So he tells Nanda, go back because you never know what might happen, which kind of foreshadows what's going to happen. So lots of stuff happening in this in this part of the chapter. I want to go back to the joy in Gokula where Nanda Maharaj is giving out cows like it's going out of style. So it says that he gave out 2 million cows adorned with gems to Brahmin priests. Now, 2 million cows is a lot of cows. And I was thinking about this, and I was thinking like, well, he gave out 2 million cows, which probably means he had at least, he must have had more than 2 million cows, and probably much more because he wouldn't just give away his last 2 million cows. So how much space would that take up to have 2 million cows? And how does that compare with the area of Vrindavan? And so I consulted the head of dairy operations at Gita Nagari, who said that if you're just looking at 2 million cows, each cow, based on the way that they took care of cows back in the day, probably is going to need about 1 acre of land per year for eating, right? Just for grass and eating trees and that sort of thing. So that's 2 million acres, which is a little over 3,000 square miles. And so 3,000 square miles is about the size of Rhode Island and Delaware put together. Like it's a pretty big area. And then I looked in Lilamrita, and Lilamrita says that the Vrindavan area is 84 square miles, which is about like between the size of Gainesville and Orlando. So there's this huge discrepancy, right? How could 2 million cows fit in just 84 square miles? More than 2 million cows, right? Probably much more. And so there's a couple ways that you could kind of think about this. You could think that like, well, maybe things got mistranslated, or maybe somebody exaggerated a little bit in the Bhagavatam, and maybe that's what's going on. It wasn't actually millions of cows. There's another way you could look at it. It's just like, well, it says 2 million cows in Srimad Bhagavatam, and that won't fit in 84 square miles, but I'm just not going to think about it. And you just repress it and just, try not to think too hard about the geographics of the situation. Or you could think about how reality might have higher dimensions. So this is the hyperdimensional part of the class. Okay, so there's this book, Vedic Cosmography and Astronomy, which was written by Sadaputta, who was one of Srila Prabhupada's greatest devotee scientists, who helped start the Bhaktivedanta Institute. And he actually addresses this very topic in the second chapter of this book. So I'm going to read you a little bit, and so we can make sense together of how over 2 million cows could fit in this tiny area, or relatively small area of Vrindavan. So first he's quoting from the Brahma Samhita, and he says, these verses indicate that the form of Krishna is made of many parts, but that each part is identical to the whole. Also, all space is within the form of Krishna, but at the same time, Krishna is fully present within every atom. One implication of this is that the entire universe, which is within Krishna, is fully present within every atom of the universe. Such a state of affairs cannot be visualized in three-dimensional terms, and indeed, it is not possible within three-dimensional space. The statement that reality is like this must simply be taken as an axiom, as fact, describing the position of Krishna as the supreme absolute truth. Thus, the Vedic concept of space begins with a statement of Krishna's unified nature rather than with the geometric axioms defining three-dimensional space. Okay, so basically what he's saying is that instead of thinking of space, in this story as being just kind of like of what space is that includes or that is based on Krishna, who is infinitely dimensional, and therefore this space can have higher dimensions. So what would it mean that there's like a higher dimensional space? Because it's something that's like very inconceivable for us. So, okay, who here has ever played or has ever heard of Pokemon Go? All right, yeah. So in Pokemon Go, right, you have your phone and you're looking at the world, and maybe in the middle of the floor there, I launched Pokemon Go and I'm looking at my phone. It's like, oh, there's a Pokemon right there. It's a Bulbasaur. It's shiny. Oh, I'm gonna catch it, right? But then the people and some other people, right? If some of you have your phones, you're playing Pokemon Go, you pointed at the spot on the floor, you're like, oh yeah, I see it. There's the Bulbasaur. Oh, I'm gonna get it first. So we have this agreement. But then other people who are not playing Pokemon Go and maybe don't have their phones out or whatever, they look and they're just like, what are you talking about? There's nothing there, right? So this is kind of a way you can think of what it is like to see a reality with more dimensions versus a reality with less dimensions. There's kind of more things that can exist in the same space, even though in our three-dimensional reality you can't necessarily see it. But with more dimensions, you can have more in the same space, and that could be an explanation of how you get all these cows in this very, very small area. So then the question is like, well, then why can't we see it, right? Like, what if this is what's going on in the Srimad Bhagavatam? And I encourage you to also, when you're reading Srimad Bhagavatam with all these crazy stories, to think about it in this way as well. How come if that's what's going on in there, how come we can't see it? So Sariputta goes on. The Vedic Shastras mention many remarkable events that are said to have taken place on the earth in the remote past. Many of these events involve phenomena that we do not experience today, and one might ask why this is so, if these events did actually occur at one time. One reason for this, given in the Bhagavatam, is that prior to the beginning of Kali Yuga, natural processes on the earth operated in a different mode than they do today. See Srimad Bhagavatam 1:4-17 through 18 purport. The sensory powers of all living beings were on a higher average level than they are at present, and advanced beings such as demigods and great sages regularly visited the earth. Thus, the earthly realm of ordinary human life was more intimately linked up with higher realms of material and spiritual reality than it has been since the start of the Kali Yuga. So there has been a change in especially the way that human beings can perceive the world. So you can think of this as kind of being like, okay, imagine that there's some kind of nuclear accident, and they kind of contain it, but everybody gets some radioactive exposure. And what happens is that in this radioactive exposure, the effect of it is that everybody's children become colorblind, right? So then in the next generations, right, like generations and generations from now, you have an entire human population where everybody is colorblind, and that's just normal. And then maybe they're looking back at the stuff that we're writing and reading today, and they see these words like blue and pink and orange, but they can't make sense of it. They're like, what is this? This is just this must be some kind of mythology, because I can't see it. Nobody else here can see it. So this must be, sorry. The future generations who are colorblind, they're looking at these words from, you know, the old times, which would be our times, and they see these words like blue and pink and yellow and orange, and, you know, they just can't conceive of what these things could be, because none of them can see color. And so even if they're looking at photos or video from our era, which to us we see in glorious color, they're just going to see it in black and white. And so they, you know, so they might be in a similar position as us, wondering like, well, how could all of these amazing, incredible things have happened in Srimad Bhagavatam that, you know, seem to be happening on a daily basis that we can't see? So these are kind of two ways that you can think about the higher dimensional reality of the Srimad Bhagavatam and why we may not be able to perceive it. Okay, next we're going back to Kamsa, because Kamsa, he goes through some really interesting character development in this part of the story. So we're going back and just thinking about what he sort of the emotional journey that he went through during like right during and after sort of Krishna's advent. So at first, you know, he's ready. He takes the baby daughter, Yogamaya, who he thinks is Devaki's newborn child, and is ready to, you know, just throw her on the floor, bash her brains out. Then suddenly, when the baby daughter turns into this goddess and says, and, you know, has this amazing 8-armed form with many weapons, he's very apologetic. Oh, you know, I've made a mistake. Please, Vasudeva and Devaki, forgive me. I feel so bad. And he does genuinely feel some regret. But then, you know, less than 24 hours later, he's talking to his ministers, and suddenly he's ready to kill all the babies in his kingdom, and also, you know, persecute all the brahmanas, and just go and just let his ministers go on this absolute, you know, horrific spree. So then I was thinking, you know, what does this remind me of? And so I have a little question for you. I'm going to play a sound clip, and if you can guess who this is, then please let me know.
Do what must be done, Lord, be done. Will not hesitate. Show no mercy.
All right, can someone tell me who said that and in what context? Yes, Chris, do you have a microphone?
Definitely Darth Sidious, aka the Emperor Palpatine. I don't remember the context though.
All right, excellent job. All right, so let's take a minute and go to another galaxy and talk a little bit about what happened in that quote that I just played. So in the Star Wars prequels, right, you have this evil or this secretly evil political minister, Senator Palpatine, who by day is this very, you know, gentle, mild-mannered, very professional, sort of governmental officer, but then secretly he's actually this very, very evil, powerful being named Darth Sidious. And so at this point, he is putting his plan to take over the entire galaxy into action, and he's doing it by manipulating this younger man named Anakin Skywalker, who also he has a lot of power, and he also has something that he's very afraid of, right? He has seen in a dream, in a vision, that the woman he loves, his wife, is going to die somehow, some kind of horrible death. And he decides that he has to do everything in his power in order to prevent that from happening, because he cannot live without her. If she dies in this way, he just will not be able to go on. He'll go berserk, he'll commit suicide, something like that. And this fear makes him weak, and it makes him easily manipulable by somebody who is very calculating, like Senator Palpatine, right? So Palpatine senses that, oh, there's this boy who has a lot of power, and he's very afraid of this particular thing. And if I tell him I can help him prevent that thing, that I can show him, teach him how to have the power to keep his wife safe from this death, then he will be mine, then he'll do whatever I say. And similarly, King Kamsa, right? King Kamsa is not actually Palpatine in this scenario. That's not a one throne ratio. Palpatine is much smarter than King Kamsa. But the same thing is happening where Kamsa hears this voice from the sky, right? Has this knowledge that comes from somewhere that, oh, the eighth son of Devaki is going to kill you. And so Kamsa, whose name Kamsa in Sanskrit actually means bell metal, so the metal that is used to make kind of the bells that you ring, right? It's an appropriate name because, you know, some way, and he's immediately like, oh, I'm gonna kill, right? So the voice comes from the sky and says, you know, the eighth son of your wife, who's just gotten married, who hasn't even started having kids yet, is going to kill you. So, right, that's at least 8 years in the future, and he's just ready to slit her throat right there. Like Kamsa, he's very easily manipulable. All it takes is some kind of like threat to his body, to his life, and he's just ready to pull out all the stops, you know, throw all of his compunctions and his morals away, and just do whatever it takes. So that is why Kamsa back and forth, you know, infanticide, oh, I'm so sorry, oh, back to infanticide thing going on here, because he's just very easily manipulated by any kind of existential threat to his life. And the ministers, who are a little bit more like Palpatine in this scenario, they get that. And so they take the opportunity, they say, oh, you know, we're really afraid for your life. And so really the only option, if you want to live, if you want us to protect you and do our jobs as your government advisors, is to just kill all of the babies that have been born in the past 10 days. And then once Kamsa says, you know, yeah, okay, go and kill all the babies. I mean, once you've allowed for infanticide, like what is, you know, killing a few extra brahmanas, right? That's just like icing on the cake. So when the minister's like, oh, and by the way, you know, you're really strong, but the demigods, they still don't like you. They might come back and cause you some trouble. I mean, you can totally beat them, but we should just wipe them out just in case. So, you know, let's go after the brahmanas, who of course are very peaceful and are very necessary to a cultured society. And then Kamsa is like, yeah, sure, whatever, you know, yeah, let's go for it. So it has that feeling of the, you know, do what must be done, show no mercy, that Palpatine was expressing in this quote. So we see the parallels here between Kamsa, if his life is threatened, or even, you know, some hint of his life is some hint of some threat to his life happens, then he's just ready to kill everyone. With the way Anakin Skywalker is manipulated because of his fear that his wife is going to die, which basically would result in kind of his own death. So they're very similar situations. Now, Vasudev, by contrast, at the end of this part, right? He knows that bad things are potentially going to happen to people that he loves. Right? So Vasudev, he's intelligent, he's political, right? He knows what Kamsa is about. He knows that Kamsa has already started persecuting the Yadus, and that you know, with Yogamaya's prophecy, he figures, you know, Kamsa is not going to rest. He's going to keep going after babies, even though he has kind of stopped going after Vasudev and Devaki in particular. So he's meeting with Nanda, but he can't reveal that he knows any of this, even though inside, it's, you know, in somewhere, because he loves his, you know, his, Nanda, who is his stepbrother, and also, you know, Krishna, and also Balaram, he's probably, you know, seeing that, like, oh, that Kamsa is going to come after them. There's going to be some kind of there's going to be some kind of danger to my children. Like it's basically 100% guaranteed. And yet he doesn't freak out the way Kamsa does, right? He stays calm and he just kind of hints. He's just like, hey, like it's great that you have this new son, and maybe you should go back before anything strange kind of happens, right? Incredible restraint, totally the opposite of Kamsa. And that's kind of the message that I took away. What is the difference between Kamsa and Vasudeva, right? Between like Kamsa and Anakin Skywalker on one side and Vasudeva on the other side. And the thing is that Kamsa and Anakin Skywalker, they have faith in these fallible soldiers, right? That basically the highest thing that Kamsa can think of is like, my own body. Oh, I'm so strong. Oh, I've defeated the demigods, right? It's all about him. And for Anakin, he's like, oh, it's my wife and I just love her and I can't live without her, right? These are fallible soldiers. These are entities that can easily be, taken away from their material senses. Kamsa can die at any time. Padme Amidala could also die at any time. So they are not putting their faith in the right thing. Whereas Vasudeva, even though he has every reason to be freaking out, is calm because he has faith in Krishna, because he has faith in something, he believes in something, he worships something that is greater than himself, greater than everybody, and that's always going to be there, and that is the absolute truth. So we go through this world, and sometimes we may be afraid of things, and that can make us vulnerable. And we all have to be careful about opportunistic people who may pretend that they're on our side, but actually kind of want to play on our fears and exploit them for some purpose, right? Palpatine wants to rule the galaxy, and the ministers want to just rape, kill, and pillage, etc., right? But if we have faith in Krishna, if we have faith in this absolute truth, something that's not fallible, then we can resist the overtures and the manipulations of people who would want to exploit our fears. So that's why we should all have faith in Krishna as the supreme absolute personality of Godhead. Thank you. All right, questions? Or comments. Comments are also allowed. Yes, Fanan Prabhu, could you give it the mic?
So your attempt to resolve the the problem with having 8 million cows in less than 100 square miles, I think it effectively is saying that when Bhagavatam is talking about these cows and this land of Vrindavan, it means something else than what we think cows and land of Vrindavan means. So, for example, the idea of what's that game that we're talking about?
Pokemon Go.
Pokemon Go.
Mm-hmm.
So those Pokemon characters, they are conceptual. They're not actually there. Depending upon the device or the thing you're looking at, you can think that they are there, but they're a conception created there. Similarly, when we're talking about this idea of higher dimensions, again, the idea is that what is being described is something different than what we think it is. It's not actually cows, it's not actually land, but it's something else. Is that how? So the danger in looking at that is it means that when I'm looking at Bhagavatam and I'm seeing this description of kings and kingdoms and mention of places and mention of people, is it something completely different than what I understand them normally to be? Because if I take them what they seem on face value, then it doesn't compute.
Yeah, so the answer is yes and no, right? So Pokemon Go, it's not a perfect analogy because it's very hard to have really good analogies for the idea of higher dimensions. But I mean, when you're playing Pokemon Go, right, it's not just a concept, like it's not just imagination. There are, there's software, there's bits, there's stuff, there's actual material stuff that is creating this experience, and that says like, okay, the Pokemon is there and not over there. So there's the point in space, that's where the Pokemon is, and it is in a sense there. Even if people without phones can't see it, and even if maybe you can't like feel it there, but it is in a sense there. And I think the same thing is going on with Srimad Bhagavatam as well, where these, I mean, the land is the land, the cows are the cows, but there are dimensions to the space and perhaps also to the people, depending, I guess, that we can't necessarily perceive now. And I forgot to mention this during the actual class, but there's also, if you want to think about this in scientific terms, I was talking to Kala Swarupa Prabhu, who's doing his doctoral dissertation in theoretical physics. And so he was telling me that so gravity, for example, right? Physicists, they for various reasons, they feel like gravity should be a stronger force than it seems to be to our perception. And so therefore, one of the hypotheses is that there are extra dimensions that we can't see that gravity goes through that kind of weakens its force. And similarly, string theory, right, which is supposed to kind of explain the nature of everything, actually posits 10 or 11 dimensions, depending on which version of string theory you're looking at. And it's just that the dimensions that we can't see are they use a lot of really complicated math to shrink them or to compactify them until they're so small that we can't actually detect them with any instruments. So there is a rational basis for believing that reality has more dimensions than we can necessarily see, and it doesn't mean that the cows and the land that we see in Bhagavatam are kind of a different concept any more than it means that gravity is a different concept because we posit these additional dimensions. Does that help? Probably Priya.
And another factor to take into consideration to understand this is that we're talking about Vrindavan. So Vrindavan, although it's a place in this world that we can go to and get a plane and land in Delhi and drive there and go there, and it can be measured as a geographical area, but at the same time it's much more than that, because it's the holy Dham. It's like, it's not made out of material energy the way other places are, most other places are, but it's actually like imported from the spiritual world. Like when Krishna descended, his Dham from the spiritual world that's made of his internal spiritual energy descended with him. So that means that it's unlimited, because everything in the material world is limited and temporary, but in the spiritual world, everything is unlimited and eternal. So yeah, and we hear about how in the pastimes of Krishna, the Vrindavan Dham can expand and contract, right? When Krishna wants to walk from Nandagram to Ramanreti, it's a long distance. It's, maybe like if you take a bus, it's going to take you like 45 minutes, but he just walks there like super quickly. Why? Because it's like it contracts, just like a lotus flower that blooms, and then at night it closes, the petals come together. So let's say Nandagram's on this petal and Ramanreti's on this petal, and then Krishna wants to go there, then it just contracts and there he is. So the Dham has all these amazing capabilities due to its being comprised of spiritual energy. It's hard for us to conceive because our conceptualization is based on our experience of matter, which is a totally different category of energy.
Thanks very much. Arishan Prabhu.
I have a comment. What struck me the most in the beginning when Devaki says, all my kids were killed by providence. It's as a mother, all the kids pretty much killed by somebody. The accuser is right there. I'm sorry, the person to be accused. And she doesn't do it. It's kind of struck me. She says, well, it's providence. It's only a devotee can do that. I was thinking it's something similar to what happened to Pandavas, when Bhishma was on the deathbed, they were like, so what is it? Providence, is it time, or is it karma, or is it Krishna? So it's quite a quality of forgiveness and compassion and tolerance that's really crystallizes here.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you brought up. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, I was reading the purports, and Prabhupada was explaining that that this is actually also a Kshatriya technique, like a kind of a political maneuvering technique, where first you sort of like first you sort of like minimize what the person has done, like, oh, or you kind of like describe what the person has done, and then you sort of say, oh, but it was not your fault, and then say like, oh, but you could give me a gift. And that's kind of a way that Kshatriyas, that's like a diplomatic tactic that they can use, like, oh, you did this thing, oh, but it wasn't your fault, oh, but you can make it up to me by being nice. And that's like a political thing. But yeah, the devotee part is that she was doing all of this to protect Mother Yashoda's child, because she was so compassionate that even though this is not her child, she just wants to save this child's life at any cost. So she's using all of her Kshatriya, wiles at her disposal to get Kamsa to relinquish the child and not kill her.
And it's funny that Kamsa also uses the argument that basically that it was their karma, it was a providence, but for him it's like it's so funny. They're saying the same thing, but he's misusing the same philosophy to do. And of course, Dhritarashtra had the same thing. What can I do? It's all providence, So devotee they use that philosophy for forgiving or serving. With the other party might use it just for their own benefit. But it's like oftentimes spiritual bypassing.
Very true. All right. I think that's it. So thank you very much for being such wonderful listeners and participants in this class. Grantara Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Srila Prabhupada ki.